Number 10. Jack from Jupiter. There have been changes in who are members of the Seven made from comic to TV series. And one of these changes is Jack from Jupiter, who is featured in the comic but not the series. Jack from Jupiter was not a popular member of the Seven, so is deprioritized by the company because he's not selling merch as well as the rest. He's a bit on the cowardly side, a heavy drug addict, and isn't the worst member of the Seven but also isn't the best. He was meant to be a combination of Captain Marvel and the Martian Manhunter, though of course he had a fake origin. He is supposed to be an alien but was just created with Compound V like all the others. Comic fans miss him, but as far as changes go, it's not the worst swap they could have made. Number 9. They're the Justice League. So as The Boys is a superhero deconstruction, it has more poignance when one recognizes the heroes being taken apart. So the Seven are meant to be a dark version of the Justice League, one that is corporately owned. This greatly changes the dynamic. Really, that puts them more in line with the JLI, the Justice League International, rather than the standard Justice League. But the members of the Seven are based off the premier members of the Justice League. It's a cynical look at the idea of an elite superhero group, but it falls perfectly in line with Ennis's admitted disdain for the concept. Number 8. Translucent. So the series is more interested in deconstructing superheroes in general. They don't have to necessarily be DC ones, though there is a focus on mocking Snyder. So with this in mind, the hero Translucent was introduced to the team, a member with invisibility powers, despite the fact that that's not what the word translucent means, as is pointed out by Butcher in the show itself. Now, one of the reasons this change was made was so they could tweak the series intro, but also so they could have that gory death by butt bomb, even though the series writers admitted that based on their own rules, he shouldn't have exploded like that, stating, "Yes, you're absolutely right, the skin should have contained the blast, but then we'd have missed out on that amazing bloody explosion of blood and meat," meaning they're here for you having to suspend your disbelief. You know it wouldn't have been as good if he didn't explode. Number 7. His dog, Terror. This is on here because, well, this joke is a lot. So the Butcher has a dog named Terror that he is taught to fornicate with anything he tells it to on command. He can do it on command. Now this raises a lot of questions. How did he train it to do this? Why? The whole dog assault. Poor Terror, just trying to live a cute dog life, next thing you know you're banging on command. I just have questions. I wonder about things like this. The Terror so far has not made it into the Amazon Prime adaptation, to the sadness of comic book fans. He could show up later, he has been referenced. However, the changes being made to the series are quite intriguing and makes it exciting to know that you're not exactly sure what happens next. For some people hate it. Number 6. Speaking of Queen Maeve, let's talk about her and the Homelander. Her and the Homelander's relationship is a twisted mess in both versions, though in the series there's this odd, dark, twisted chemistry thing happening, though some will not want to admit that or talk about it. So in the comics, the Homelander tricks her into having sex with Black Noir, takes photos of it, and then shares the photos around with the rest of the Seven. This very much hurts her and is also part of the distancing. It's even more disturbing when we learn what we do about Black Noir later on. Which, okay, real talk, redundant name is redundant. Which brings us to number 5. The backstory. As mentioned in one of our earlier videos on The Boys, the superhero origins are all fake, part of the propaganda machine propped up by the comic book industry to fuel Vought's hold on the illusion that the supers are heroes, and forces for good, but also that they are something magical and unattainable to hide the fact that anyone can get powers by taking Compound V, which can then alter one on a genetic level, resulting in the birth of children with powers. The original Seven are lab grown. The Homelander actually has a produced origin of his landing and discovery. All false. Vought wanted to give Annie the backstory of being a rape victim. This alongside the debut of a more revealing costume than the one they had already forced her into. However, she refuses both the backstory and the costume, rejecting the insult to both victims of assault and also the trivialization of her own at the hands of other members of the Seven. Number 4. The Lamplighter's fate. One of the things that is almost instantly dissolved in the comic series is the truce between the Boys and the Seven, which was tenuous at best. The Lamplighter had been injured in the botched 9/11 mission, and as a result had been put on lots of meds. Well, these meds had some psychotic consequences, and he ended up murdering Mallory, a member of the Boys' grandchildren. After this, the Boys were on a warpath, so the Seven offered the Lamplighter to them to kill in exchange for a truce. The Lamplighter would later be reanimated by Vought Industries, though like all reanimated heroes, he is essentially a zombie. This was so the public would buy into the mythology spread by comics that heroes never die. He is kept chained up by the Seven in the basement, and they take turns cleaning up his mess. Number 3. He's manipulative. Now, The Boys is a series without heroes, but some have come to feel that The Boys' true villain is the Butcher, and this is because of how he manipulates all events and those around him, including his allies. As the series series unfolds, it slowly becomes clear that what the Butcher has with the boys isn't friendship or camaraderie, but instead is a means to an end, and he is constantly playing them off their weaknesses to keep them distracted from what he is doing. Examples of this include things like telling Huey he always wanted a little brother despite already having one, or putting him in situations where he has to use lethal force to cause him moral dilemmas so that he won't be able to observe and think, things that Huey is great at. He's also lied about his kills and his actual motivations, which we'll get to in a bit. He's not to be trusted, and those in the know don't, but even they aren't prepared for the true climax of events that actually didn't have as much to do with the Homelander as everyone had been led to believe. Number 2. The Homelander's upbringing. So there are a lot of factors that went into that, but one that stands out is him having to grow up in a lab, and what was done to secure him was intense. His father spent most of his life strapped to a hydrogen bomb, and his mom died giving birth to him. He's been treated as a commodity from birth, and has no name. He ages slower than others, so he is also older than people assume, which means he has had more time to be groomed into the hedonistic mess he became. But that wasn't enough to stop him from rebelling. No, for that they had a contingency plan, and it went horribly wrong. Which brings us to number 1. The biggest spoiler. Here it is, spoiler-geddon. The Black Noir twist. Throughout the series, it is believed that the Homelander raped the Butcher's wife, that he has been indulging in cannibalism, necrophilia, and the like, that he has a dissociative personality disorder, and has been sending pictures of his own misdeeds to himself. But it turns out that wasn't the case. No, it turns out that Black Noir was a clone of the Homelander. He was made as a contingency plan to watch over the Homelander in case he ever got out of line, but he was never to act beforehand, and he couldn't reveal himself or have his own life. This drove him insane, rendering him incapable of speech, and forcing a permanent manic grin on his face. He was the one who performed many of the depravities attributed to the Homelander, in an attempt to trigger him so that he would finally have to stop him and fulfill his purpose and be free. It's a good twist, but it undermines a lot of Butcher's arc, but then works really well with Homelander's. It would be cool to see something like it in the series. This video was filmed just right after season 1, by the way, just putting that out there. Number 10. Starlight's original purpose. We're gonna jump back and forth between comic and show continuity because they are different, but that's a good thing. They both have different strengths and weaknesses, and it means that it's worth it to read and watch because you're gonna get a different experience. In the comics, Garth Ennis, the book's author, intended to have Annie be a pure victim. Annie January, aka Starlight, was meant to be there as a foil for the Seven to demonstrate the depths the world's so-called greatest heroes had sunk to. However, once he began the writing process, he found himself placing her in a romance with Huey, and finding her to be quite the compelling character. In fact, she became one of his favorites. Her tale transitioned into one of strength, faith, and hope, making her one of the strongest and most well-rounded characters in the series. He also said there is a bit of guilt in there about some of what he had planned. It's still rough for Annie, but it's rough for everyone. The boys' world is not a nice one. Number 9. She's not weak. There is a misconception out there that the comic version of Starlight is weak because she is less vocal than her television counterpart. That is not the case at all. What happens is that her story unfolds more slowly, and she has a harder time dealing with the shell shock that her heroes are all these monsters. And she has to really wrestle with what does being in the Seven really mean for her. She actually for a time finds herself becoming cruel like them, but rejects it and tries to maintain her personality, but also try and find a way to assert herself, which she does. Her tale is one that is very empowering and shocking, but it's meant to be. You're not supposed to leave the boys feeling clean. This brings us nicely into number 8, which is the changes made to some of Starlight's storylines for the adaptation. Most of these changes revolve around her sexual assault. This occurs when she first joins the Seven. In the comics, she is assaulted by the Homelander along with the A-Train and Black Noir, and she keeps it to herself, but finds ways to assert and defend herself within the team. She's not quite willing at the start to shatter the illusion for the people around the world, who she believes need heroes. She also does blame herself in a very realistic tale of self-doubt and questions of agency. Meanwhile in the series is the Deep and the Deep alone who coerces her into sexual favors, and spoilers ahead, she does go public later. What has happened here is adaptational changes because of the times. Showrunner Eric Kripke was quite vocal about adapting the story for a post-Me Too world, so they didn't want her to feel like she had no agency. Well, a lot of what it boiled down to was if they waited for her to have her epiphany, say in season 3, there would be petitions and riots in the streets, calls for cancellation, the the whole 9 yards, so they felt they had to do it sooner rather than later. Thankfully they have it play out well and in line with the boys' universe, but still that sounds like a reactive audience problem in general, not a source material problem. Also, the Deep's comeuppance plays out well, though the point is more nuanced than some are reporting. Number 7. Queen Maeve's alcoholism. This facet is kept in both series. It stems in the comics from her desire to really help people that is completely crushed by the failed 9/11 rescue attempt in the comics. Queen Maeve descends into a state of apathy and just indulging her own needs, and is even cold to Starlight after she comes to her looking for some form of kindness after her assault. She's a bit more fleshed out in the series, but much of the core remains the same. Number 6. Her powers. Now on the surface, Starlight's powers may appear to resemble Jubilee's Sparkle Sparkle, but just like Jubilee, they can be much more than that. It's not just fireworks. Starlight can absorb electrical energy around her to fuel her powers. She can fire energy blasts, and she is bioluminescent, meaning she can glow, but the level of brightness she can achieve is literally blinding. In the comics, she blinds the A-Train in one eye when he tries to lay his hands on her again. She also has a tragic backstory. She blinded her parents as a child, and had to be placed in special foster care for children with powers, which does seem plausible. If children manifested their powers from birth, there would be a lot of accidents, a lot of PR to dispatch. This is part of what causes Annie to reject the fake backstory the company attempts. Number 5. He almost killed his dad. So when we finally get a look at the Butcher's backstory, we see that it is as harsh as one would expect. Also, just fun fact, in the comics he's described as sounding like Michael Caine. The Butcher came from an abusive home and almost murdered his father, but ended up being dissuaded by his brother, whom he lied about having, or rather, not having. Up until he met his wife, he was just a ball of rage and violence, with only her being able to calm the storm within. But that all ends when she is murdered by her super baby. Okay, so I have questions. How far along was the super baby? Or is the Butcher just really inattentive? Oh, nice sweatshirts, honey. Number 4. Feminist icon. In the Boys series, after Annie comes out against the Deep, she is made into a feminist icon, and a symbol of strength by Vought Industries. The only thing is, this is against her consent. The company does this for PR and to increase her popularity with female fans, and hence her profitability and marketability. It is a very cynical look and commentary on the modern media industry, and one that really works. It's a tone with the jaded cynicism of Ennis's original work, so even though it's a change, it works well. Annie's actress, however, maintains her character's view that hopeful doesn't mean naive, and that even in a dark world, hope can exist and withstand the dark things that people do. Number 3. The plane hijacking. So the plane incident is a pivotal moment in both series, wherein it is revealed that despite all their rep as heroes, they're not really trained, they're just products, so they completely botch the rescue. Honestly, changing it from the 9/11 setting is probably for the best. All you really need is for the audience to see them being callous, careless, and ultimately leaving everyone to die. The Homelander in the series is so cold about it and then sociopathic about turning it around for Vought. It's really well executed. In the comics, this failure leads to the destruction of the Brooklyn Bridge, which is the monument to the disaster of that day rather than what truly happened. In the series, Maeve having to leave that little girl, I'm still not okay. Number 2. Annie and the Homelander. We're going to be talking about the comic series for this one. As mentioned here, it is the Homelander who instigates the coercion, leading her around the headquarters before telling her that a blowjob is the last step in her initiation. However, the more time Starlight spends with the Seven, the more what happens there becomes commonplace, and there are moments when she forgets, and just starts talking to the Homelander about her fears about leaving the Seven, only for him to throw it back in her face, going, "After all you did to join," which suddenly reminds her of everything, leaving her furious with herself for forgetting and him coldly baffled. Now some feel this is unrealistic, but it could also be viewed as extremely human. If one stays in a negative situation long enough, even people who have been cruel can become fixtures and can come to feel like friends, and they can even be comforts simply because of the familiarity, and humans have an amazing ability to adapt. It's a powerful moment. Whether or not it works for you, read and find out. Number 1. A bit of a stalker. The relationship between Annie and Huey is one of the bright spots in Annie's life, and begins with neither knowing the other's secret identity, so they both just get to know each other as people, and find that they have a genuine love of life and a desire to grow together. However, this changes for a bit once Huey learns that Annie is not only a superhero, but a member of the Seven. He also has a hard time after he sees what was done to her. It was recorded, Butcher had a tape, it was a thing. Lots of surveillance, everywhere. Driven by the fear that she could lose him, Annie follows him to Scotland. In the comics, Huey is Scottish, and he is modeled off of Simon Pegg, who by the time this adaptation rolled around was too old to play Huey, but he was still added to the adaptation as Huey's father. Still, following Huey around the world, that's a lot of a lot. Sometimes people need space. Though for the hopeless romantics out there, they may feel sometimes need to do anything for love.
Well.
Number 10, his original name. We're starting off light because it's gonna get real dark later. So the Butcher is the second name for the leader of the boys. When Garth Ennis was creating the character, he wanted a name that would reflect the brutality and savagery he had planned. And for that, at first, this character's name was going to be The Savage. This would actually have played better today than when the boys first began publication, funnily enough. Back in 2006, the term savage was not a slang word that was hip with the kids. Rather, it was either an outdated term or an actual slur against the indigenous. Ultimately, he went with The Butcher, and he gets more mileage out of it with puns too. You can do a lot with The Butcher. For example, The Butcher's backstory miniseries is called The Boys Butcher Baker Candlestick Maker, because nothing says nursery rhymes like gangland violence. Number 9, he's Garth Ennis' favorite character. When Garth Ennis was creating The Boys, he was seeking to outdo himself in terms of sexuality, violence, and just his general disdain for superheroes. In his own words, to out-preacher Preacher. At that point, his most controversial work, which also managed to get adapted. In that process, he set about creating his brutal, calculating protagonist, The Butcher, and he quickly became his favorite character. Now, he's created more characters since, so one has to wonder if this still stands. One's opinions do tend to change over time. However, even if he's not the favorite anymore, he obviously still has a special place in Ennis' heart, and he certainly is a memorable character. Few who have read The Boys will be forgetting The Butcher anytime soon. Number 8, stereotypical motivations. It's spoiler time. So one of the changes made to the story is surrounding the Butcher's motivations and the genesis of his true hatred of the Homelander in particular. These were originally in the comic that his wife was raped by a soup he deduces was the Homelander and impregnated. She was then killed by the super baby growing in her womb, which he then had to beat to death with a lampshade. However, this backstory is changed for the series in a very clever way that moves away from the tired rape revenge motivation for the male character trope, while still retaining the core elements of the story. In the comics, this was what caused the Butcher's increased level of brutality towards soups, making sure situations that didn't have to end in lethal violence did. However, this is also a weaker motivation because of the Homelander twist at the end of the comic that involves clones, and means that the Butcher was after the wrong person, which kinda takes some of the pizzazz out of it all. Number 7, faith. One of the very well handled aspects of The Boys, surprisingly for something so gory and irreverent, is faith. Annie's faith in particular. She is genuinely Christian and finds her beliefs shaken by what has happened to her and the truth about heroes. It parallels the myth of the hero quite well, and how the beliefs are simultaneously shared and shattered. So it's quite clever and deep. It's scary that that has largely been left by the wayside in exchange for a general naivete. Still, faith is a controversial topic, and again, the kind of thing that could lead to review bombing by outlets, something that a series on a streaming service that will need to spread through word of mouth cannot afford. So far the word of mouth has been good. I'm definitely enjoying the adaptation. I did not have crushing disappointment, so yay. Number 6, he will kill children. So the Butcher is very much unhinged and has an attitude that the only good super is a dead one, regardless of their age. He's just there to escalate the situation. This is exemplified when the boys go up against Super Duper, a very low-tier superpowered team who are young, low-powered, and in some cases mentally challenged. They actually spend most of their time as support personnel for a disabled group home. The fact that they're not awful confuses and kind of enrages the Butcher. He was ready to kill one of them because they accidentally insulted him because they had Tourette's. It's only Huey's intervention and protest that they're just kids that keeps him from full-on going at them. Number 5, can't stop the A-Train, except you totally can. The A-Train meets quite the ending in the comics. Huey is manipulated into killing him by Butcher, who plays with Huey's hatred of him for killing his girlfriend and for assaulting Starlight. The whole thing is quite horrifying, with the A-Train never fully realizing just what is happening because he's so terrified. He gets his head kicked off, just right off. I'd say ouch, but would you even feel that? Probably. Yeah. Number 4, the Seven are afraid of him. When Huey joins the team in the comics, the boys and the Seven are at a standstill kind of trucious thing. However, this truce is one the Butcher is set on breaking. The truce initially was due to an escalation of violence that led to the murder of a former member of the boys' grandchildren and the death of the Lamplighter, who was then reanimated but at the intelligence level of a zombie. This was so the public could see him and believe that heroes can't die. But the truth is the Seven keep him chained up in the basement in his own filth. Anyways, back to the Butcher. The levels to which he will go actually disturb the Seven, particularly the Homelander, who can tell that the Butcher hates him. He can sense this through his heart rate, etc., but he doesn't know why. What freaks all of the Seven out is that he can't be bought, he's always watching them, and that he can kill them. When you have the most powerful beings on their toes, that says something. Number 3, Vigilante. The thing with the boys' universe is that the heroes are owned and controlled. You can't just be running around willy-nilly, then you're a vigilante, which is still not allowed. in the boys' universe, or Toronto where the show is shot and does a terrible job of masking it. Annie has always wanted to help people, but in both versions of the boys the only way she can is through the system, and when she cracks in the show that gets her in major trouble. She's threatened with legal action and it blows her secret identity. And yet, many of the crimes they do stop are staged. This is again to increase how good the heroes look. She's essentially just a pawn. So even heroes who want to do good find themselves trapped in a world where they cannot, which is part of what sends some of them into a tailspin, while some of the others are just bad people. This leads us directly into number 2. He killed the boys. Very few people make it out of this comic series unscathed, and the boys are no exception. No character shields for anybody. When it comes to the Butcher's true plans, he knows that the other members of his team will try and stop him, so he needs to get them out of the way. First we see the murder of allies from earlier issues, and finally the elimination of the boys themselves, except for Huey. It's a sad realization that the reader comes to, and for some it completely ruins the story. There are lots of readers who enjoyed the story up until this point, where they felt that it was just a little bit of overkill. The Butcher even ultimately ended up manipulating Huey into killing him. Yeah, Butcher is pretty unlikable in the comic series. The TV series is working on that. Actually, they're doing a lot of humanizing there for everybody. And number 1. The biggest spoiler of them all, the betrayal. The Butcher has another plan, aside from misplaced vengeance against the Homelander. His plan is really to destroy all soups by using the unstable formulation of Compound V, and thus it is revealed that he didn't kill the scientist who created it, and instead was working with him to destabilize it and destroy all soups. So again, this is a mileage varies thing. For some people, while the series is super irreverent towards supers, it's another thing to see them brutally annihilated. People have limits. The Butcher is cold and sadistic, but some feel this action undermines the series, while others feel it encompasses it beautifully. In the show, we'll probably see something different, or at least watch it unfold differently. I'm definitely excited.